Here is Donald Trump defending Ken Cuccinelli for rewriting the poem. Now, again, I agree. The poem is aspirational. Our country has never been, as welcoming to immigrants as we sort of pretend that we have been. But there is no doubt that immigrant populations in this country have, to some extent, we're all immigrants here. But the ones that we consider to be immigrant, waves of immigration, have undeniably made this country to the extent that it's a great one. And here is Donald Trump, though. Ken Cuccinelli just can't. They're so insular that they just don't know how this sounds to people outside of it. And again, the question is, they've redefined and provided their henchmen. And incidentally, this is being done at a time where the Trump administration is attacking the unions representing immigration judges, because the union makes sure that the immigration judges have some independence from the DOJ. Remember, Jeff Sessions wanted all the immigrant judges to basically say, like, you have to decide basically, here's a color chart. And if they cross this shade of brown, they're not eligible. It's an exaggeration.
It's an exaggeration, but it's on that continuum, maybe.
Exactly. And it's like, we found proxies, actually, that we scientifically tested can find actually the hue of the person that is standing in front of you without having to actually look at.
Stand in front of this light, sir.
Exactly.
I just feel like they hired a weird British guy for that.
But nevertheless, here is Donald Trump defending Ken Cuccinelli.
Maybe there ought to be a different poem on the Statue of Liberty that says immigrants can come and stand up for themselves and take care of themselves. Do you think that should be changed? Well, I don't think it's fair to have the American taxpayer, it's about America first. I don't think it's fair to have the American taxpayer paying for people to come into the United States. So what we've done is institute what took place many, many years ago at our founding, virtually. But we are just reinstituting it, and I think it's long overdue. I am tired of seeing our taxpayer paying for people to come into the country and immediately go on to welfare and various other things.
First of all, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Obviously it happens to some extent, but it certainly happens to a lesser extent than native-born Americans. The amount that immigrants put into the economy and pay in terms of taxes is still a net positive. And they don't have the ability, which is really the bottom line, to make these assessments in any accurate way. Unless it's like patently obvious. Someone comes in, they don't have the ability to work, or they don't have the ability to care for themselves, or they don't have someone who's going to sponsor and guarantee that that they won't need that type of support. So there you have it.
It would be fine if they did, though.
What?
People are entitled to a basic level of a humane life, no matter where they're from or who they are.
I think that's true. And I don't know that, the American public would necessarily agree with that, broadly speaking. And I think from a moral standpoint, we should take in anybody that comes. But I think, broadly speaking, for the American public, this is obviously, they're doing this for not just for ideological reasons, but because they perceive that this is what their voters want. And they are trying to create a wedge where they are getting Democrats to get on stage and say we should let anybody in, even if they're going to immediately, tax dollars are going to go pay for them. This is the same dynamic that they have been demonizing all sorts of welfare programs since, the mid 60s, which is to make it as if all these money you're paying in taxes just go to black people or to Mexicans.
That's
I remember
how
a
they
study-
attacked the welfare state for everyone.
I remember a study
That's
from the
what I was
80s where it was like, I think it was late 80s, but it was basically, Chomsky used to cite it all the time, but it was basically that from news coverage, Americans believed that the majority, like they didn't even overshoot. They thought that most of their tax dollars in the federal budget went to welfare and foreign aid.
Right. Right.
It's like
And-
incredible
and-
propaganda job.
And I bet you they also believe that the majority of the money that goes to welfare goes to black people.
Well, not only, of course, there's a reason why those two things were even correlated in the polling. Like why, welfare programs and foreign aid are not necessarily at all the same thing, right? Like I get in some ways how they're on a continuum, but of course, racializing it would even connect those two things so firmly to begin with.
Oh, yeah,
right?
and
Like
that's-
here's all the money we're giving to other people across the board.
And that's why anti-racism has to play such an important role in getting back some semblance of the welfare state, right? And mass politics. But I feel like where we got hung up on yesterday was that you were arguing more in the short term and I was arguing more in the long term about this stuff. Because it is true, down the line, I see climate change is going to cause massive waves of migration around the world. Like we know that that's true. I don't have the numbers in front of me. And until we take a hard look at borders and the idea of border enforcement and keeping people out of our particular state, where the stage is set for kind of eco-fascism, and I really don't want to see us go there.
I'm not sure I follow, but
Listen to the Antifada
I will.
for more.
Here is Ainsley Earhart trying to, she has a friend, incidentally, who has an all chicken salad restaurant.
That's an enterprise.
And that is going to be, she worries about the future of that chicken salad enterprise, particularly if immigrants are all getting, all sorts of taxpayer largesse.
Refugees, asylum seekers, not part of this, but it is folks who come here. Listen, it's common sense. If you're a taxpayer, you want to know your dollars are going to people who, if they're here, are doing so productively. If you show a pattern of dependency, why would we want you to become a permanent resident or a citizen, as opposed to the folks who say, I've worked hard 2 or 3 jobs to provide for my family. I want to do it the right way legally to get a green card. And that's what the Trump administration has said. Those are the folks we welcome.
It is common sense. Think about it.
Such
Usually
common
people
sense.
come over here and they get a green card so that they can work in a restaurant or wherever they want to work. A better opportunity. But to come over to our country when you're not fleeing your country because you're not in danger, you're just coming to live on our soil, shouldn't you contribute too?
Problem is the left has created incentives for that. When you can get a driver's license, you can get free college, you can get free health care, and then ultimately...
Pause it. Well, first of all, we don't have free health care yet. We don't have the free college yet. And getting a driver's license, I wouldn't say is like a huge benefit. It's just a way in which you can work.
Also a way to vote illegally.
Right, exactly. To take you to the polls. But the fact of the matter is the point is that to the extent that people subscribe to this notion that you don't want to allow a citizen, regardless of who their family is or whether their family is here, whether they are in any way inhibited from working because of ailment or whatnot. I mean, even if you subscribe to their ideological perspective on that, that's where we're at now. This rule is about denying people that assessment based upon stuff that has no reasonable way of predicting that they would not be, if not self-sufficient, largely self-sufficient.
Free health care, and then
They want them to be
ultimately
able to vote.
food stamps and possibly voting. I mean, all of that leads to that culture, and that's what the president's trying to fight back.
What culture?
The culture of dependency. Sam.
Browning.
The culture of Brown. Or as Nas said, an African-looking Manhattan, although he meant it in a positive way. But I think it's also just so like the way you cannot talk about the foreign policy dimensions of this stuff across the board, right? And there's no contradictions for ruthlessly protesting and fighting against and dismantling what they're doing. And at the same time, whether we're talking about ecological policies or direct U.S. interference in places, as well, or European or Chinese for that matter, it's just going to be impossible to solve. I mean, you can directly correlate just even specifically Honduras with this massive spike going back to the Obama administration backing a coup against Manuel Zelaya in 2009. And now they have a narco state with massive street protests happening. I mean, the foreign policy dimension is so obvious and inescapable. And you have to ask those people when they talk about our borders and blah, 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 how they think they take that stuff seriously when they continue to push these foreign policy paradigms that generate instability and crisis.
As long as you fly over the border,
Well,
the
there you
border
go.
doesn't have the same
Yeah,
integrity.
it's different.